Hi, this is Jack Healy from the New York Times, and I'm at Standing Rock with Tara Houska.
Hey, how are you?
um, how cold is it today? What are we looking at, and where are we, and what are we doing?
It is pretty chilly outside, I would say. We are currently at the Ocheti-Shakoan encampment here just outside the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, where folks have been protesting against the Dakota Access Pipeline for months.
Tara is an attorney. She was arrested during one of the demonstrations, joining the more than 500 people who have been arrested. And we're going to talk about the pipeline, about what's happening at the camps, and we would love to hear any questions, comments, anything like that from you. It is a little bit chilly. My hands are shaking from the cold a little bit, so excuse any shakes or anything. Would you just tell us a little bit about kind of what brought you here in the first place, and sort of, just the logistics of living here and how they've changed since the weather's gotten like this?
Sure. So I knew that the Dakota Access Pipeline fight was happening, and that it had reached a point where the machines were actually starting, and despite the protestations of the tribe, that the company was moving forward. Dakota Access was going to put its pipeline through sacred sites and, under the Missouri River. That's what they wanted to do. And so this call went out from LaDonna Allard on Facebook. She took to Facebook, so she's a Standing Rock member. She's one of the co-founders of the Sacred Stone Camp. And when that call went out, it was also at the time that all of these runners from here, they ran from here, Cannonball, North Dakota, all the way to Washington, D.C., so 2,000 miles. And they showed up in Washington, D.C., and I saw everything that was happening, and I was like, I have to go. They need our help. I'm fighting a pipeline in my own community, Line 3, and had actually been working really hard against the Sandpiper line, which is another line that is tied to Enbridge, the company behind a lot of these pipelines, the largest pipeline company in the world. And I came out here, and it was not like this.
Here, let me just pan across here for a second. I mean, this is massive, right? I mean, before we started this, we were talking about how at one point it was perhaps the 14th largest city in North Dakota, and now it's maybe climbed the ladder a bit. Who knows?
I would guess so. And when I got here, I was over on that side, and I was the only tent in that whole area. And it was very, very small at that point, and this was actually the overflow camp.
Wow.
Pitched my tent and started living in Standing Rock to oppose the Dakota Access Pipeline. And we watched as the weather has grown much colder, but more and more and more people joined in and saw this massive fight against fossil fuel infrastructure happening, and also a huge battle for Indigenous rights and Indigenous people. So this kind of became this huge issue of so many different things, the environmental relationship of people to fossil fuels, where we want that narrative to go, and also how this country treats Indigenous people still today in 2016.
One of the things that you brought up a second ago was really interesting, is the fact that there are pipelines being built across the country right now. The Sandpiper, the Dakota Access crosses 4 states, and there have been protests in Iowa. Why do you think that this site, this pipeline, and this tribe has galvanized people in a way like almost no other? I mean, some people say that there's never been anything like this in the history of this country.
Yeah, this is over 500 Indigenous nations that have come together to stand against the Dakota Access Pipeline. The Sandpiper line, actually, so here's kind of an example of just how prolific these lines are. So Sandpiper, actually, Enbridge pulled the funding from Sandpiper, so we thought we had a win. And then they turned around and put it towards Dakota Access because this pipeline was further along. And so it's kind of like this hydra, right? You cut off one head and there's another one somewhere else. There's this network of pipelines that are going to become stranded assets because the fossil fuel industry is actually dying. And they're holding on as tightly as they can to keep their profit margins high. I think the reason that Standing Rock and this fight has become so prominent and has become this, this gathering of nations and this gathering of people that's never happened before, not at this size and not at this, level of support, is because, one, Indigenous peoples have been trampled on and run over for so long. These projects, extractive industry, when they happen in places that you don't think about. They happen out of sight, out of mind. They don't go through, white suburbia and, in this case, actually Bismarck. The pipeline was rerouted from Bismarck due to concerns of their drinking water and put next to the reservation. It's a perfect example of environmental racism, but also this narrative of putting pipelines and these kind of destructive projects through Indian country. It goes next to reservations. It goes through public lands. It goes through places that people don't think about. Indigenous people are impacted first and worst by climate change and by all these different projects that happen, right? These really, really destructive things. Because, essentially the companies have decided that, our fight and our lives are less valuable. We are sacrifice zones. And so I think this has become this moment of, we're not sacrifice zones. Enough is enough. Stop doing this to our people. Stop doing this to our communities. You can't just run over our rights as you have for so long. This has become a moment where Indigenous people are gathering and saying, we're still here. We have rights. Our children's lives matter. Our futures matter. And, we're changing this narrative. We're changing the narrative of not being, you don't see us on television. You don't see us in the mainstream. You don't see us advocating when these things are still happening. Our communities are still dealing with so many different, disparate treatments across the board. So education, poverty, healthcare, all these things are substandard. You look at so the reservation most people think of as Pine Ridge, right? You look at these places that are third world conditions in the United States, and people don't like to think about that, right? But with this fight, which happens at a time that we're at a really critical moment environmentally, we're at a moment in which climate change is happening right now. People are going underwater right now. The first U.S. climate change refugees are Indigenous peoples down in Louisiana. Their homes are going underwater. They have to move back. That's happening. And so this has become this moment of, let's change this. We have to stop this.
I just wanted to say that the New York Times kind of bumped us up a little bit, and so we've got a few more viewers. And so if you're just joining us, I'm talking to Tara Houska, who is an attorney and activist here at Standing Rock. Do you want to walk around a bit and kind of take people around the camp a little bit? Apology, I've got a Wi-Fi connection that is in my pocket, so hopefully it won't blink out, but I think it would be good to maybe show people around and send us your questions. We can talk about that as we walk, but Marcus Ling wanted to know about sort of what the Army Corps' role is right now and sort of what their position is and what their next move is. So do you want to maybe chat about that as we talk?
Sure. I think the Army Corps is a really interesting situation because it is this, I was talking about this narrative, right? This narrative of running over Indigenous rights. And the Army Corps of Engineers has a very long history of a negative relationship with Indigenous people, of running over Indigenous people's lands and rights. So specific to the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, when you drive into Fort Yates, when you drive into one of their largest communities, you drive past this sunken forest. And the reason that sunken forest is there is because the Army Corps of Engineers put in the Oahe Dam and flooded all those lands.
This is this is sort of a post-World War II project that was part of a widespread damming of the Missouri River.
Yeah, and so they thought, it would be okay to flood Indigenous people's lands and wipe out these places from history. And again, in this project we see Army Corps of Engineers says, okay, Bismarck, we're not going to put it through your community, but we're going to put it through the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, even though this tribe, has been very vocal and participatory in the process to stop this from happening. They've said no, all the way along. Do not do this. Do not put this through our drinking water. This is the sole drinking water source of our reservation. And they did it anyway. They approved this anyway. And they thought, I'm guessing in their heads, that this is not going to be a fight, or it's going to be a very small one that we can shut down and just act as business as usual.
I think it's probably fair to say that just if you're watching from home, the roads here are basically like solid ice. It snowed maybe 3 or 4 days ago, and it's been trampled and driven to the point where this is basically a skating rink. And so
I could be wearing ice skates right now. Like that could happen.
All day long people have been sledding down this hill. Little kids have been going up there with their little plastic sleds. But I think what you said was really interesting, because I think no one, I think, maybe anticipated that people were, at least people who weren't really serious about this protest, did not anticipate that it would go on so long, that it would draw so many people, and that people would be as serious and dedicated to their commitment to stay here. You know, when people would say at the height of summer when it's 90 degrees, we'll stay here through the winter is one thing, but to actually be here doing it is another.
Yeah, no, when I got here in August, it was very nice. You know, the weather was very, very nice, and it was much easier living conditions than it is now. But, you know, I think to the Army Corps question, you know, we see this narrative of the United States Army versus Indigenous people, and we've actually seen this play out, I think, in the pushing back of Native folks. So there was an 1851 treaty encampment that was formed directly on the pipeline route, and the law enforcement, you know, the Morton County and several other folks, including Hennepin County from my own, you know, home state of Minnesota, came and aggressively, violently pushed out Indigenous people. And it was hard for a number of reasons, not just from the rubber bullets and not just from, you know, the canisters of tear gas and, you know, mace and all these things, and beanbag rounds. I was actually almost shot by a beanbag round directly to my head.
Oh my goodness.
I got pulled back and it exploded. I mean, it was a very traumatic situation from that, but it was also traumatic from this collective memory of Indigenous people being pushed off of treaty lands. Because those are treaty lands. We're standing on treaty lands right now. These were never ceded to the United States. These were never paid for. These are stolen lands.
A woman named Sherry Van Houten, who's watching, wanted to ask, and her comment sort of echoes other people. If people are thousands of miles away, they just wanted to know how they, you know, could help, or by not, if they can't be here.
Yeah, North Dakota. I mean, that's also kind of an incredible testament to how powerful this protection effort really is. You know, we don't call ourselves protesters; we're protectors of sacred sites and water. The testament to that is, one, North Dakota is really hard to get to.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people knew where Cannonball, North Dakota was before this. And now it's become this, you know, huge thing that everyone knows where Cannonball is. But a lot of folks do support, and they can't actually get here physically. And so there's, you know, a legal fund you can donate to, the Sacred Stone Legal Fund. There's over 500 charges that have been brought against people protecting the land and protecting the water. You can donate to that. You can, what I would suggest is, you know, a really powerful way that you can participate in the process. Write to President Obama, write to the Army Corps of Engineers, tell them what they're doing is wrong and to stop this. They have the authority to stop this project. They could have done an environmental impact statement. That's what the tribe has asked for.
There was an EA, right? There was an environmental assessment,
yep.
which is sort of much shorter and, you know, more truncated.
There was an environmental assessment, which is the lowest level review.
Yeah.
Because this company successfully used Nationwide Permit 12. It's a general permit that's actually intended for small-scale infrastructure projects, so like a boat ramp or connecting your house to a gas line. They use that in a way to segment this pipeline into little pieces, this 1,172-mile pipeline into little pieces, and just count that one little piece and not the cumulative impacts of the entire line. And through that, they got to do an environmental assessment instead of an environmental impact statement. The EIS would have considered, you know, fully considered sacred sites. It would have fully considered the cumulative impacts of this line to the drinking water, to the environment, to the public health, all those things that we as, you know, U.S. citizens should have a right to. Our rights should not be, you know, like less than the corporations, but somehow in this situation they were, and that seems to be an ongoing narrative.
What are the big outstanding questions that you have about what Obama may do or has the power to do in the last days of his administration, and whether those if he acts to stop the pipeline, whether Trump could be able to undo those relatively quickly? I mean, give us sort of like scenarios for the next few months ahead.
Yeah, it's, you know, with President Obama specifically, to, you know, just on a personal level, the first DC internship I had was in the White House. It was on the Council. It was on the Council on Environmental Quality, and so that was when Keystone was happening in 2011. And I got to work on the Hearth Act when I was there. It's a act that delegates the authority to tribes to do leasing on reservations, so they don't have to go through the federal government. That act was a testament to tribal self-determination and to sovereignty and to all those principles that the Obama administration pushed throughout. President Obama has been the strongest tribal president we've ever had. You know, he knows about Indigenous people. He's been to Standing Rock. He's physically been here. And so it's been really hard to see his inaction on this issue, and to see his let's let it play out over several weeks as a human rights situation is happening in the United States. Let's see what happens. We're gonna review these permits. We're gonna suspend them. We're gonna review them, and then we don't really know what the process looks like or how long it's gonna take. Now we're seeing these statements coming out from the Army Corps of Engineers that we're gonna be treated as trespassers, and this kind of gradual pushing back of Native people that are opposing this pipeline. So I want to see where's the order for direct the Army Corps of Engineers to do an environmental impact statement, that you have the authority to do that. I want to see tribal self-determination and tribal rights acknowledged. To be such a strong tribal president and to have inaction on this issue, this is the biggest indigenous fight in modern history.
I mean, literally the biggest. You just look at the size of this thing is astonishing. To say nothing of all of the voices of people who are not here.
Yeah, and hundreds of indigenous nations coming together, hundreds of Native folks, or of Native, governments standing together and saying no more. We stand with Standing Rock. And to see this in action it's appalling. It's shameful. It's a shameful thing happening in the United States. To see teenage girls being maced, unarmed people being hit with rubber bullets, unarmed people, being hit with concussion grenades. A woman nearly lost her arm, and people were sprayed in freezing temperatures with water hoses. Those things are happening in this country, and there's no response. It feels like we're somehow being transported back to the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. These are human rights violations happening right now. And I really hope that President Obama leaves a legacy of standing up for protected classes and of standing up for human rights and the environment. I want to see the environmental impact statement. I want to see maybe, if he's willing to reject it altogether and, tell the Army Corps of Engineers to reject these permits, then maybe that happens. But if the pipeline is so safe as Dakota Access says, then do an environmental impact statement. And we all know when Trump comes in, this is fifth on his list to get through.
Yeah.
So,
Tara, thanks for talking with me. I wish we could talk forever. I have to write a story right now. So unfortunately, I have to go run back up to my car and satisfy editors who really need me to do some stuff. But we're gonna be here. I'm gonna be here for a few days until at least Tuesday or Wednesday or so. We'll do more live streams from this. We'll try to answer questions people had about just what it's like to live here, because it's completely amazing to see how people manage
Mongolian
not to freeze.
yurts.
Yeah, Mongolian yurts are an amazing
Teepees.
invention. Yeah. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll be back more for soon. Thanks.
thank you.